without further ado, Jonathan Tasini.
Wow, what a great turnout. I mean, when we started planning this and the folks from the campaign reached out to me, I thought, we only got a few days, a little bit of time to promote it. I was wondering about how many people would turn out. I mean, you packed the place, which is really amazing. So do you feel the Bern? Yeah! Do you feel the Bern? Yeah! Bern! Yeah! I want you to say that. Feel the Bern? Yeah! Right, I know. Warm up the crowd a little bit here. So the first thing, I want to say a couple of things before I start and explain what we're going to do briefly here today. The first thing is that the people who introduced themselves, the campaign people, deserve another huge round of applause and thank you for the people here. In that sense, you're thanking all the campaign people all around the country in New Hampshire, Iowa, here in South Carolina, in Nevada, the people who are based in Burlington. All of those people, and I've met many of them, all of them could be doing something else and probably get paid more. And if you've ever been in a campaign, how many people have been on a campaign full time? I mean, full time. I mean, when you basically don't get a good night's sleep ever, when you don't eat well, when the moment you turn your phone on, you've got 1,000 messages, it is intense. And so we, and I say we because I consider myself among the soldiers for Bernie, we have a sense of gratitude towards the people who are putting their lives on hold in some way to create a political revolution. The second group of people I want to thank are the people here. How many people have volunteered for Bernie so far? Wow. Almost the whole room, 3/4 of the room. Now, give yourselves a And how many people have volunteered for Bernie for the first time in a campaign? Is this how many people, first time campaign?
Wow.
That's a pretty big number too. That's really incredible. So now, what Nathaniel said was right about social media, that everyone needs to contribute to kind of spread the message, but volunteering is not just social media, it's making phone calls, it's writing letters, it's walking the streets, it's getting people to sign petitions, it's talking to your neighbor, it's talking to your friend, your family member. You are the lifeblood of the campaign. No matter how many great staffers Bernie can find after he's raised $26 million. No matter how many staffers he can find, a campaign, and I've been in campaigns all my adult life, a campaign rises and falls on the volunteers, on the people that were willing to put time into a campaign to make it happen. So if you volunteered, give a little more. If you're thinking about volunteering, we really, really need you all across the country, because really what we're about is trying to create a political revolution. So I want to talk just briefly about myself, about why I'm here, and then get into a little what we've called Bernie 101. So, first of all, I have to show this picture. Right? This is Bernie, and I took this picture of him holding a book in South Carolina when I was here 5 or 6 weeks ago. We did an event in Florence. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
No, I'm from Manhattan, so you have to excuse me. And Bernie loves this book, which is 95% Bernie's words. And the reason I wrote this book is I felt very strongly that there had to be some bridge between Bernie and voters everywhere. And like Bernie, I was convinced that if the majority of people heard what he was about, and has been about for 20, 30, and 40 years, he didn't just all of a sudden discover his positions yesterday, not that I'm referring to anybody in particular, but Bernie has held these views for 30 and 40 years. And I have known Bernie for a fair amount of time. I've basically been a political organizer, writer, strategist, mostly in the labor movement. Who's a union member here? I know that's a little tough in South Carolina. When people say interview, the first thing I say is, I'm a member of organized labor and I'm proud of it. Organized labor created the middle class and created the kind of prosperity that we have today. So I used to do a lot of lobbying in Washington, and I used to go down, because I was based in the Northeast, and we'd knock on Bernie's door. And I always thought that was kind of a waste of time. You know why? Because he was always with us. And when you go down and lobby, from my point of view, you're trying to find the people who don't agree with you, right? You got to sway over, get some more votes. Bernie was with us 100% of the time, but I love the guy. But I really got to know him about 2.5 years ago when I interviewed him for Playboy magazine. And it's one of the only places in America.
I missed that spread. I didn't see that.
I was waiting for that. But I had a lot of friends who said, well, they now can pick up the magazine to read, finally read it for the words. So it's one of the places, it's probably one of the only places where you can actually put out someone's views, 10,000, 15,000 words. Fidel Castro, who's been there. Many celebrities. Jimmy Carter, who we hold in our hearts now. I was just talking with someone. What a great ex-president, right?
Yeah.
When you think about what it's like to be an ex-president, not grabbing as much money as you can to put in your pocket, I mean, he has really stood out. And Jimmy Carter, if you may remember that quote that he got a little in trouble for when he said, "I lust in my heart." Yeah. Everybody, yeah. By the way, all the younger people are looking and say, "What is he talking about?" You see this kind of like, look it up. Google it. Lust in your heart. Anyway, he did that for Playboy magazine. Long and short, I wanted to do this book to get Bernie's views out to as many people as possible. And I approached a publisher, and from the time she said interested, it's a progressive publisher, independent publisher, Chelsea Green, based in Vermont, 100% worker owned.
Yeah.
The book was done in 22 days.
Wow.
So I basically spent, 12, 14 hours a day sitting on my butt, and thank God for Google, because what I basically did was pull together Bernie's views and his words. I had to get out of the way as the writer. And what I wanted to do was really convey to people what Bernie stood for and what his words were. Not analyze it, but what his actual words were. So that's what that book basically does. So what I want to do today is kind of do a really shorter version of what's in the book and talk a little bit about the issues, engage you a little bit, partly if there's anybody who has some doubts about some issues, but more important, to give each of you a specific thing that, probably comes up in conversations you're having with people. Like, why should you vote for Bernie? And you kind of stop and think, well, here's why. And so I want to go quickly through that, and I want to start, if you don't remember any of the facts or specifics, all I want is that if you walk away, you remember these two things. And if you can't see it in the angles, I'll read it out. What this is about, what this whole campaign is about, is a political revolution versus the status quo.
Yeah. Okay.
And that is, forget all the facts, we'll get to that. That is the most important thing to me to say to people. That what we are about is we are never going to go back to what happened before. We are not going to be satisfied with the status quo where the banks rob us, where we pay outrageous amounts of money for healthcare, where we go into immoral wars, illegal immoral wars. Political revolution versus the status quo. And if, in my view, Bernie Sanders represents the political revolution, and we all here represent the political revolution that we need and want. Now, quickly, in like 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, I want just people to throw out in a couple of words, what to you would mean a political revolution? Whatever issue you care about. I'm just going to write them in shorthand.
Money out of politics.
Money, okay, dollars, and I'm going to just do this right, not in politics. And by the way, if we don't agree on anything today, my handwriting stinks. And I don't know anything about art. It took me To do an M, I had to practice and practice and throw away many sheets of paper. Many sheets of paper died to get to this moment. Okay, dollars out of politics.
Single payer, healthcare.
Okay, and let's do this.
More social programs.
End of war on drugs, and I heard single payer over here. Single payer.
Reduce military
Oh,
budget.
okay, hold on. Right, just because I can't hear. What is climate change?
Climate change?
Climate change.
Abolish poverty.
Abolish poverty.
Living wages.
Okay,
Living wages.
Living wages.
Citizens United, somewhat dollars out of politics, is that okay? Just so, it's not, I want to try to categorize it. Yes, come in. End of for-profit prison, so, yes. End
And for-profit prison.
Living wages.
dollar, I heard
Improvement on the
minimum wage, right?
Living wage.
Living wage.
Living wage.
Two separate things.
Strengthen the labor movement.
Raise
I
minimum
agree,
wage.
strengthen the labor, yes.
Put ethics back in food.
Ethics, he said ethics back in food.
That's back in food.
Labor movement.
Reduce defense spending.
trade policy.
Okay, infrastructure, trade. I'm gonna say trade for the people.
Right.
Yes.
Full employment.
Full employment.
Reform the judicial system.
Okay, on full employment.
Repeal the Patriot Act.
Okay, no more Patriot. Okay,
And the university business model.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, free education, public
so
education.
what?
Reduce
Free
defense
public
spending.
education. Black Lives
Black
Matter.
Lives Matter, BLM.
Accountability.
Reduce defense spending.
Hold on, try to. Oh, I see. All right. Infrastructure was over here before. Can you see that it says infrastructure? And I'm gonna bring me here. All right, this is great. Now that my reason for listing these. I'm sorry.
Reform the judicial system.
Reform judicial system. Okay.
You didn't put mine down either.
All of the suggestions were important. Now,
Yes.
here's the thing. It's not,
You missed
Big one.
what's that?
Women's rights.
Women's rights.
Oh, well.
And we can say, because I know someone will say we didn't
That's
place
right.
LGBT.
One more.
Okay.
Education.
G. Education.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I have okay. No, I get to say stuff.
All right.
Here's why I wanted to raise all these. All the ones we put on, all the ones we listed, and the ones you thought about yourself, they come up in your minds for various reasons. Some of it's practical. I want to make sure I can make a living. Some of it is about morality. So when somebody says end poverty, it's partly I want to be able to make a decent living, but it's also something you want to see your community prosper and not have poverty. And so the second part of what I want us to think about and remember is that the political revolution and what Bernie has stood for and all these things that you listed have three basic ideas. One is they're based on moral principles. The second thing is that there is an element of shared responsibility. Some people call it shared sacrifice. And the third is, and this is really important because a lot of people say to those of us who want the political revolution, Bernie, oh well, this is all good words. It's based in economic wisdom. Okay? And what I want to do now is go through each of some of those and show how every principle is part of this campaign, this revolution. And you'll notice, cleverly, how I color-coded this. And that took a lot of figuring out, too. So, all the moral principles we go through, if you want to go back and refer to them, are in blue. All the things that are shared responsibility are whatever this color is. Right? And then the economic wisdom pieces are cleverly in green. We can talk about the color coordination later, and I accept all criticism. Now, Lori, can you help me for a second? First of all, this is an example of an amazing volunteer who I just met today, who came in, and all the cards that you saw on your chairs, and some of the work here was all done by her, so a little round of applause for her. Now, we're going to come back to these ping pong balls, but I want you to remember that they're here. Could you fill that as far as without spilling them? It actually might even be just about, oh, look at that. Beautiful. Okay. Thank you very much. We're going to come back to these ping pong balls, because this is about money. For me? No, you can actually. I'll call on you later. Yes, we'll come back later. No way. So let's start, and the reason I want to start with this is because I see a lot of younger people, and I think we're all young here, right? Yeah. So some people are younger than others.
That's right.
And so I want to start with education. It is an outrage today, and I'm sure that there are some people who could actually testify this, that our young people go to school and they walk out with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And so Bernie has, as you know, proposed free college education for anybody who wants it. You're supposed to cheer for that. Loud, cheering, reactions, it's all good. You should do that anytime you want. So his principle is basically every person who wants to expand their mind and enhance their job options should have that right. And then he says, how are we going to pay for that? Maybe $70 billion a year. How are we going to pay for that? And the way Bernie puts it, which I love, and I'll explain that in a minute, is the middle class bailed out Wall Street. Now it's time for Wall Street to get back to the middle class. And you probably heard him say that in many of the press. And by the way, I've heard Bernie speak hundreds of times now, and I never tire of listening to him. Every time I see him in little small groups or big, he still moves me. You know, there's something about it that the authenticity. And so when he says that, there's a real both passion about it, but there's a practicality. And what he's proposing, you may have heard this, is something called a financial transactions tax. And it's been around for a little bit, for a number of years, and it's very simple. It's a little tiny tax on all this Wall Street speculation. It would never affect little investors like us, to the extent we want to trade shares. It's all about those billionaires who move millions and millions of shares every day. And you can raise, depending on how you estimate, you can raise almost $300 billion a year.
Wow.
Just from that. Some people say 250 billion, some people say 350 billion, but remember that what Bernie's proposing, and I love the analogy, is that in order to advance society, to take care of our young people, Wall Street should pay.
Yeah.
And he's got a specific thing about this. Now, where's the economic wisdom in that? It's just, it's too bad we don't run the world, because we would see all the logic in this. Right now, there's about $1.2 trillion in student debt.
Yeah.
And it's mostly not held by people in their 20s, it's mostly held by people in their 30s and 40s. Because if you think about it, when you leave college, sometimes you get a little time before you have to start paying it back.
Right.
And then it stretches on and on and on. So you've got people who are trying to start families, buy houses, who can't do that. So if we adopt this, think of the economic prosperity that comes from that. It's like taking hundreds of billions of dollars and pouring it into the economy, and all this stuff we're concerned about. The economy's not growing strong enough. Think of all that money that students are not carrying on as debt, but they're able to buy houses, cars, have entertainment, maybe save a little for retirement.
And lower the interest rates on the loans that you have?
Pardon me? And look, thank you very much. And thank you. What's your name?
Duffy. Duffy Brown?
Delphi. Absolutely right. And part of Bernie's proposal is to push down the interest rates on the existing loans. Part of that would be the money, so that those who are carrying debt now can actually have a little relief. Now that's, to me, absolutely brilliant. Brilliant proposal. And it appeals to people all across the country. Who's not for that? So when people say, you know, this guy's a democratic socialist, and I get this asked all the time in interviews, and he says, oh yeah, I'm for making sure that every single person gets free education. After that, no young person hears that other thing about democratic socialism. They just hear free education. I'm for that guy. I want that guy as president. He knows what hurts me. Okay, jobs. Every person should be able to earn a living wage at a job where she or he is treated with dignity and respect.
Yeah.
And I put in union with 2 exclamation marks. You should put 3 exclamation marks.
Yeah.
And that's what, you know, I know that in this state that's harder, but the truth is that, what I said before, unions build the middle class, and there is no real way, for people to have decent living wages and dignity and respect without a union. It just doesn't happen.
It's
Does
a
not
right
happen.
to work state.
I understand that.
Well, just because that's the way it is doesn't mean that's the way it should be.
Agreed.
That's
Agreed.
and that's what
And
the political
that does
revolution's
not
about, right?
That does not encroach on your right to still hold a card. I have a card. You can hold a union card in South Carolina.
Okay.
Not if you're a teacher.
Not if you're a teacher. Amen. I am.
It is. So let's, when we come back, I'm going to go through this and we'll have a little give and take, and let's bring that out in some of the things, you know, things you disagree with, points to make. Because the more we talk about this, and this is really the point of doing this Bernie 101, the more we talk about it, the more we get comfortable talking to other people about it. So now, the shared responsibility piece is pretty simple. Does anybody know what the average compensation is for a CEO in the Standard & Poor's 500, which is one of the... Anybody want to take a guess?
350 million.
50 million, someone said?
350.
The average. The average is $13.5 million a year. The average worker, $36,000 a year.
But what about his bonuses?
I said complete compensation. That was total compensation average. Now, some of them get, as people pointed out, 300 million, but we were talking about the average. That's still obscene. And so one of the things we talk about when we talk about shared responsibility is lowering CEO pay. There's lots of ways to do that. We can talk about that. The other,
See, that's just the CEO. That's not counting all his lieutenants.
that's correct.
They're making a lot of money.
That's true, and so it's the CEO is kind of a placeholder for the executives of the top thing. You know, we know CEO pay is what is measured most frequently by even the mainstream media. They look at that thing, they do these analyses. But I think it's an absolute right point. All the people in the executive suite, and then they just throw the crumbs to the workers. Corporate stock gambling, casino is another part that essentially it's part of the CEO compensation. The more the stock goes up, the more they get paid. And so we want to reduce that. And then on the shared responsibility part, we want to push for higher wage. And Bernie in particular, on the minimum wage, is pushing for the $15 an hour minimum wage.
And look at Costco.
And cost, that's right. And the reason I put this under shared responsibility, $15 an hour minimum wage, is these all things fit together. If we really want to have a $15 minimum wage, we have to know that when we go into Burger King, we're going to pay a little bit more for that hamburger, right? That's true. And most people actually say when I've done these focus groups around Walmart, and I watch people behind one of those mirrors, you know, like creepy mirrors. And if you say to the Walmart workers, would they be willing to pay more? They say sure. And if you ask just regular people, sure. But you can't do one without the other. You can't say to people you have to pay more if you're not raising their wages too. So we have to think of this, what is this about? Political revolution.
Yep.
We don't settle for saying we get crumbs. And the $15 minimum wage, I've been working on this a little bit, mainly out of New York, but a little bit nationally. I mean, that is taken off like wildfire.
Yeah.
And the thing about a political revolution, and the reason that a certain candidate is adopting positions she's never had before, ever, not that I'm referring to anybody in particular, is that all this, and this goes back to importance of volunteering and organizing, all this stuff, this energy about minimum wage, and the reason people are talking about it, the reason people are talking about the trade, it's all because of people like you. It's all because of activists out there in the streets, moving and pushing and demanding and organizing. It goes back to Occupy Wall Street, when people sat there and said, we aren't going to let the banks do that. It's a long continued. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, we didn't talk about voter suppression, and that's one of
We're going to actually come to that under civil rights, under confront legal violence.
It's great to talk about those things, but if we don't have people getting the right to vote.
Yeah, that's a good point, and you'll see we're going to come in. If I don't bring it up again in conversation. All right, so now here's the obvious economic wisdom, right?
Yeah.
If you want, I'm always fascinated by these, economic talking heads on TV and different places who say, why is the economy not growing? And it starts and then it stops and starts up. It's not rocket science. If people don't have money to spend, the economy won't grow. 70% of our economy is based on consumer spending. So this is everyone here understands that. And the reason they don't want to, they understand, they just don't want to do anything about it. So it's just economic wisdom to say we want to raise wages because it'll make for a better economy.
Well, it's not just raising the wages, it's the number of good jobs out there are falling. I know where I worked, we used to have 250 people on our side of the plant. I just retired around 3 months ago. There's maybe 15. And those are good, paying jobs.
That's right. And when we talk about infrastructure, that's absolutely right. And that's going to come up, in the discussion about trade and what happened. And they're all a piece. You're absolutely right. Yes.
Back when my grandparents were alive, which they're a generation that has passed on, when they had the responsibility of paying their taxes, they paid their taxes. They didn't whine and complain about it because they felt that was their American duty to do that and to put it back. Why all of a sudden today is it nobody wants to pay taxes? That's the mission. No taxes. Nobody wants to pay taxes.
Because we're paying them, and the corporations aren't. And the big businesses are. And these people are not, and we are, and people are getting fed up with that.
I work with a lot of people that are on the other side, so to say, and they don't want to pay taxes either.
I don't understand. When you bring in a big business, and they get all the tax breaks going, and they don't have to pay any property tax for their business where it sits, but you and I and everybody else who owns a house has to, and we pay our percentage in every regard, and that's why people get upset.
There's no question that for the last 30 years, the notion of paying taxes has been attacked.
Yes.
And it's been a clear ideological attack. And this is why we need a political revolution, because, and I hope I'm not saying anything controversial. I lost that already. But if you look back, forget about the Republicans for a second. I hope I'm not insulting anybody in this room. They have a clear agenda to help the wealthy. But the problem has been the Democratic Party has done the same thing when it comes to taxes. So if we go back to the question about why corporations are getting away with taxes, stashing billions of dollars after General Electric, so they're stashing them abroad and cutting taxes, it's all because, and Bernie's been very clear about lobbyists and citizens united, it's all because our politicians are bought. You know that. And that's a process. Now, what we need to do, if I can suggest, is we need to engage people in that conversation. I think over the last 30 years, my opinion, is that people have felt when you talk taxes, you're reaching into my wallet. And you're talking, regular people, meaning all of us who are not billionaires. People hear the word taxes and they think they're coming after me, because what has happened is that it's true. The tax burden in many ways has gotten bigger on regular folks. And the billionaires have been getting away with it and sticking us with the tab. And Bernie has been very clear. And you'll see that either in the book or if you Google it, he has been very clear that tax rates are going to go up on the rich.
Yeah.
Significantly, in a big way.
Good.
And that is the way that we are going to be able to actually finance what we want to do. Yes?
I think another reason people don't feel good about paying their taxes is because we all see the price of everything going up, and our wages have been flat for the last 20 years.
That's right.
And the rich used to pay a lot more than they do now.
Yes, people. So, here's what you did. Who I just thought of. This is going to make you chuckle. So when you talked about taxes, and when somebody mentioned infrastructure, you know who came to mind? Who said Eisenhower? Brilliant.
Yeah.
Dwight D. Eisenhower. Now, on two things, the tax. Now, let's be clear. If Dwight Eisenhower ran today in the Republican Party, he would be called a communist. Now, not only were the tax rates higher, but, and now I'm going to date myself. In 1956, the year I was born, are you in 56, baby? All right. Let's hear it for 1956. Right on. And I feel good. In 1956, Dwight Eisenhower signed the Interstate Highway Bill, which created,
And I love it.
it was an unbelievable, back then, I mean, we built highways everywhere. Now, all those highways are full of holes now. And one of the things that Bernie says, and this goes back to good paint jobs, he wants to spend, I'm going to come back to that at the end with the ping pong ball. That's why I wanted to hold that off, but okay. $1 trillion over 10 years to create 13 million good paying jobs to fix America's infrastructure. Now, and I'm going to say this again later, people say $1 trillion, holy moly, over 10 years. It's half of what we need to spend, not by some left group saying it, but the American Civil Engineers Association says that we should be spending $200 billion a year. So Bernie is actually being quite modest and is putting a down payment on what we really should be doing to fix our infrastructure. Everybody here could have stories about the infrastructure. I mean, I was driving here from Charlotte today, and the roads, it's crazy. The Chinese are building dozens of new airports every year. And I fly through John F. Kennedy Airport, which is an embarrassment. It's like a hellhole. And that was once seen as the center of transportation. It was seen as the crown jewel. And now it's an embarrassment. So let's move on, and we're going to come back. Because I do want to move a little bit, because I know people are short on time. Okay, civil rights. We must attack structural and institutional racism and attack income and wealth inequality. I feel personally directly connected to this because I marched in support of justice for Eric Garner, who was the young African-American man who was killed in Staten Island, in my city more or less. And in the positive way, thousands of people turned out, from labor unions, from civil rights groups, from women's groups. It was amazing, and we all went to Staten Island to the place that he was gunned down by the police, and demanding justice, and stopping the killing of particularly African-American men, but of all colors. People who are being shot down in the streets by police acts of violence. And as Bernie has put it, they need to be held accountable, and where there are criminal acts, they need to be held accountable. And so there's three pieces of this that is about shared responsibility. When I say shared responsibility, it's the job of all of us to stand up and demand this. First is to confront the acts of violence by police, and then let's be clear, the racist terrorism by white supremacists. It's not just the police, but white supremacists who are bombing places and turning out and shooting We have to confront the acts of political disenfranchisement, which was what you pointed out, which is, I don't know the exact number, don't have it in my head, but millions of people are disenfranchised from voting in all sorts of ways. You know, it's the old poll tax, basically. And so people don't get to vote, particularly people of color. And then we have to confront the legal violence. And that is what somebody pointed out, the war on drugs.
And it's also part of the Patriot Act.
Yes, it is.
It's the incarceration, which somebody meant, the end of private prisons, which Bern is specifically said on his platform. So there's a whole list of that, and that's about a political revolution that frees people to be equal and to have justice. And that is something that, you know, that's not going to end in a year or two. That's an ongoing struggle that we have to confront every single day. And from an economic wisdom point, pretty clear. Economic deprivation hits communities of color disproportionately. Now that's not to say that white people aren't affected, but disproportionately over time, racism has affected, certainly in inner cities, the lack of jobs, the lack of education. That, and in particular, Bernie is trying to deal with that in a very specific way by having a huge job program, $5.5 billion, just aimed at youth, just aimed at young people, who 50% of African American youth are unemployed, can't get a job.
True.
So this is a core part of what we, if we believe in a political revolution, we need to change.
That's right.
Climate change.
Yes.
It's kind of funny. I listen to Republicans talk about this, and I just had to laugh. They always say, you know, they say, well, the science is improving, and what Democrats say is, well, actually, it hasn't proven, and we're not scientists, but we actually listen to the scientists. We know the planet's dying. And the thing about this is, I want to commend, if you haven't seen Bernie give the Liberty University talk, when he went down, everybody did. Now that was awesome. That was awesome. And the reason I want someone like that running for me as a Democrat for president is he's able to go down, if I can use the term, into the lion's den and talk to people about things. And one of the things he talked about in referencing why people, the 12,000 Jerry Falwell students, should care about this, is that he said this is about the Bible. If you believe in the Bible and you are not willing to preserve the planet, there's something wrong. And those of us who may not be as religious, we believe in saving the planet because we want to have something to hand to our children, grandchildren, so we want to have a livable planet. Now, how do we do that with shared responsibility? We have to attack corporate greed. Bernie has asked for an investigation of ExxonMobil.
Yes.
And because they did a study about climate change. Thank you very much for coming. No. You got it. No problem. Thank you very much. And so the other part about economic wisdom, quickly to go through it, is that there's a tremendous amount of cost that we bear, which we don't think about often, because of pollution and health effects that we bear in our economy. And if we endeavor to save the planet, we will also make people healthier. And we will reduce the cost of lung diseases and all the list. I'm not a doctor, but is there a doctor in the house? No. You know what I'm talking about. And then, going back to the question about good jobs. There are just a ton of studies, I've read some of them, not all of them, that say that we could completely rebuild the planet, meaning buildings, highways, and we could do it in a climate-friendly way and create huge amounts of good-paying jobs. So, you know, it's just easy to do. Yes, quickly.
The other aspect of the economic wisdom is that, remember seeing a curve before, that the longer we wait, the more it's going to cost to fix.
That's right.
So eventually the curve.
Very
is so
important point.
high that
The longer we wait, the more it's gonna cost to fix. Okay, 2 more and then we'll be done. So, foreign affairs. Now, this is really kind of important, and I actually, this is a pretty simple thing. Diplomacy before war. And I want to just, I didn't want to go on and read too much from Bernie, but I think that this, what he said when he announced that he was not going to vote for the Iraq War, when he said, I'm not going to trust George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and Donald Trump. By the way, if any of you want to run for, is there anybody in this room that would have trusted those three anyway?
No.
So there is one person running for president who somehow didn't get that message and said that, she did vote for the war. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I want you to hear what Bernie said about the war. Because what he said, and you can see it on YouTube, it's like he looked into a crystal ball and he saw 15 years around. Although you did not have to be a rocket scientist to understand what we were getting into. So listen to what he wrote, what he said. Number 1, I have not heard any estimates of how many young American men and women might die in such a war. And this speaks what he's about, what he says to the humanity of this man. Or how many tens of thousands of women and children in Iraq might also be killed.
And it was a lot more
So
than
here
that.
was a man who thought not just about what would happen here, but about the people who would lose their lives in Iraq. As a caring nation, we should do everything we can to prevent the horrible suffering that a war will cause. War must be the last recourse in international relations. Second, I am deeply concerned about the precedent that a unilateral invasion of Iraq could establish in terms of international law. If President Bush believes that the U.S. can go to war at any time against any nation, what moral or legal objection could our government raise if another country chose to do the same thing? Third, the U.S. is now involved in a very difficult war against international terrorism. We're opposed by Osama bin Laden and religious fanatics. And I agree with Brent Scowcroft, who was the former Republican National Security Advisor to George Bush Sr. An attack on Iraq at this time would seriously jeopardize the global counter-terrorist campaign we have undertaken. And last, at a time when this country has a $6 trillion national debt and a growing deficit, we should be clear that a war and a long-term American occupation of Iraq could be extremely expensive. Who, and listen to this because boy does this echo today, who will govern Iraq when Saddam Hussein is removed? And what role would the U.S. play in ensuing a civil war that could develop in that country? Will moderate governments in the region who have large Islamic fundamentalist populations be overthrown and replaced by extremists? Now, what is in the headlines every single day today? So, and ISIS, oops. So anybody who voted for the Iraq War, in my view, does not qualify to be President of the United States simply on the basis of common sense. And it goes just to quickly say, who serves in the war? It's overwhelmingly people of color and poor white people. They're the ones that go to war and are killed. It is not the sons and daughters of the people who vote for the war. Chelsea Clinton did not go to war, or many George Bush certainly didn't serve. So, and who pays? Who paid for the Iraq War? Raise all your hands, please. Raise all your hands.
No one yet.
Person in your hands for the Iraq War.
No one yet.
The Iraq War to date, and this is an estimate by Joe Stiglitz, who's a Nobel Prize winning economist, $2 to $3 trillion. That's actual cost of the war, bombs, tanks, the cost of caring for the horribly wounded people who came home, the soldiers who were sent there by politicians who came back with horrific injuries.
They don't care.
$2 to $3 trillion.
That's right.
We're paying for that. Now, I would submit to you, and this is one thing we can say to people, do we want a president who has the sense and the vision and the understanding of international diplomacy, who believes in diplomacy before war? And the answer is yes. The last thing I want to do is I want to talk about healthcare.
I got a question.
And now, and quickly, I know, I'll be quick.
No, I got a
Sorry
question.
about that. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to deposit a handful of ping pong balls in another one. Another one. One more. No, one more handful. Okay, you can put that down. Now, last thing, because this is important, I think this is an important thing. A lot of you have probably read that people are saying, okay. Another round of applause. People have said, you've probably read, oh, Bernie's programs, boy, they cost so much.
Yeah.
You're gonna bankrupt us. The Wall Street Journal put out a figure, $18 trillion. Now, the thing about that is when people use big numbers, that they don't understand what they mean, but they scare people. Anybody here have $18 trillion? Okay, just checking. It's easy to use big numbers, but here's what I want, every time you hear that, I want you to answer it this way. The first thing is that if you accept the $18 trillion number, $15 trillion of that is healthcare. And so when Bernie Sanders is talking about spending or having money for a program, $15 trillion of what he's saying out of $18 trillion is all about healthcare. And you know what? We already spend that. We already spend that on co-pays, on premiums, on CEO pay, on drugs that are too expensive. It's not as if he's saying, let's spend all this new money. What he's saying is, let's spend it more smartly. And let's reallocate it, and let's lower the cost. Every single country, and I can say this pretty confidently, every single country that has single-payer health care, which I like to refer to as Medicare for all, every single country has lowered its medical costs. I lived in Australia for 2 years, where they have essentially free health care. I paid the outrageous amount, because I was not a citizen, of $200 a month for a health care plan that here would cost $2,000. But there, they lowered their cost in health care. They made a decision to do it, and the reason is very simple. In the private health insurance industry, there's 15 to 25%, depending on how you figure it out, administrative costs. Medicare runs at 2 or 3%. Now, Medicare can be improved. There's things we need to do, but it can completely save us trillions of dollars. There's estimates that actually we could save $5 trillion if we went to Medicare. Now, why don't we do it? Of course, we know that because of the lobbyists. And with all due respect to the president, the current president, and Bernie says this, so I think I'm reflecting, it was good that what President Obama did was cover more people, but we're still paying way too much in premium health care. It's not real health care. It's not Medicare for all. It's a little stopgap thing, and if we want a political revolution, we need Medicare for all. Thank you very much.